Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for March 14th, 2025. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts, David Brill and Joshua Ashley Klayman. Before we begin, our usual disclaimers. Obviously, nothing we're discussing is any sort of investment, accounting, legal, or tax advice, and that really everything Josh and David and I are discussing are our own personal opinions, don't necessarily represent the opinions of our respective firms. For everyone in the audience joining us on LinkedIn Live, on Twitter, thank you so much. X, again, I did it, David. Sorry. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you've got questions or comments for David or Joshua, please feel free to post them in the comments section. We'll do our best to address them. David, clearly at the executive airport again, waiting to get on the private jet. Josh, thank you both for being here. It's great to see you both. Another busy week. David, what is going on in our space, and why can't I get any sleep?
What isn't going on in our space? I think in 1 week, we've had all the cross currents of a lot of market movements. We've had the Genius Act that went out of that got out of the Senate Banking Committee, which we'll talk about a little later on, and just a lot of volatility in the markets. We touched a 10% correction in the S&P, which we bounced off of, and we're having a little bit of a rally today.
Josh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say my question for you guys is what's going on with the markets in crypto? Like what's happening? When are we gonna see things go back up?
You sound like half of my family that got really interested in crypto after the election and now are asking me, Josh, is it over, this Bitcoin stuff? David, the volatility, it is something to behold. Correct me if you disagree, David. On a relative basis, we've seen far, far worse in the past decade or so. I mean, there's something to be said about double-digit volatility across all markets, including equities. David, what are your perspectives on some of the market moves? Emma Channing, thank you for joining us. I can't resist saying hello. But David, what are your thoughts when you see these market moves? And you and I talk about this a lot. How tied is it to the word tariff?
So look, I think on the broader level, tech has had a pretty serious sell-off here.
Yeah.
We've seen major tech stocks, the Mag 7 stocks have sold off quite a bit. And so if you have the major tech stocks selling off, other riskier assets have a tendency to sell off, and that's what we're seeing here. I think also we can't forget that we had a lot of appreciation over the last year, so it's normal to have some sell-offs and a little bit of a correction. I mean, in Bitcoin, unfortunately, we're used to 30-40% corrections, and we've sort of had that now. So I don't think it's unusual. To the tariff question, I really think the framing of the tariffs is the issue. I think if you asked everybody, would you be in favor of reciprocal tariffs with other countries that are putting tariffs on our goods? I think generally, most people would agree. But the fact that I think they're just coming out a little bit, one country here, one country there, I think if the way it was being phrased and the way it was being implemented was a little more linear, I think people and businesses would get more comfortable with it. I think it's just the volatility and the unknowing. Are we going to have 200% tariffs on liquor one day, or are we going to have 50% tariffs on aluminum? So I think it's just the variability of what's going on that's an issue.
David, we have this conversation a lot, and Emma, you're right. Is BTC over? Is literally something someone said to me, and you're right. It's about as good as crypto doesn't have a use case. David, when we talk about this and we have this conversation, and again, I don't want it to be a political discourse potentially, but how they're implemented, quote unquote, and then rescinded a day later, and then double the day after that. All markets hate uncertainty. Can we put to bed the idea, David, that the threat of tariffs are simply a negotiating tactic? Is this real economic policy?
Look, I think we have a grand plan. I think the grand plan is, and we heard Howard Lutnick talk about this, the other day, but the grand plan is to have reciprocal tariffs. And what they were told, the administration was talking about, is sort of having a membership fee for countries to do business with the U.S., that we're the biggest buyer of goods and that there should be something attached to that. I don't know where that goes in the end. I think everybody, who's following things understands that the administration wants to see interest rates go down, and they want to refinance our debt at a lower interest rate. There are various ways to do it, and I think that's what the goal is, and this is the way they're sort of going about it.
David, I want to go a little deeper on the macro, and Josh, I definitely want to pull you into this. Obviously, there's a lot that's happening from the legislative and the regulatory space. David, I want to push on that a little bit because I keep hearing two words that you and I hadn't heard very much say right after the election. Those two words are recession, and the other one is stagflation.
Mm.
And I'm growing a bit concerned. I think the long-term prognosis is really good generally, but when you're looking at inflation moderating, are we looking at a recession down the road, David?
Well, a lot of the investment banks are now predicting between 25 and 40%, recession risk. Look, I think we need to take one step back and look at the data. Like, we're saying we might go into recession. We might go into recession. We might go into stagflation, but that's based off the data. And do you trust the data that we've been getting? And one thing that was interesting that we've talked about and highlighted is it looks like about approximately like 65 to 80% of all the hiring last year was government jobs or jobs related to funding by government institutions. So, we don't really know what the employment rate was if you take out non-government jobs, like what was the real employment rate?
Yeah.
How many jobs really were created last year? And the other thing I'll say is that there have been a number of questions about how much spending was pushed through in the last 12 months related to the election to make the numbers look better. I'm not saying I know the answer to that, but that's something else that needs to be looked at. So is there a risk of it? Yes, but I think we need to know what the data numbers are that we're going to work off of to come to that conclusion.
And it's not the data, it's the revisions. Josh, go ahead.
I was just going to say some of what I've been seeing has been suggesting not necessarily, well, some have said we could be entering a recession. Some have been saying is we've been in a recession.
Right.
So I think that's another piece is that putting a name on what people are feeling at home.
Josh, let's look through the lens of the conversations you and I and David and our members in our legal working group often have in the ecosystem. When we look at litigation, when we look at legislation, the kind of regulatory landscape, I've got to imagine, Josh, there are some clients walking through your door once they get past security and the entourage, asking what is going on. Is this a good time for us to be doing some of the things we're planning on doing? Has the uncertainty impacted the way clients are approaching the industry, Josh?
So I think it depends, but I think that's a fantastic question because, in fact, certain people who have visited the office or others, they have come in often from other jurisdictions and very fixated. They may be related to the industry, but maybe not in the industry for long enough to have seen things go up and down, right? And some of them are like, well, wait. It looked like initially maybe Trump was good for crypto, but with the price of Bitcoin, is that over? And so I think part of that is reassuring people that, guess what? The Bitcoin price, yes. Is it helpful when it's high? Of course, right? Does it bring interest to the industry? Of course. But what's important that's changing now is not necessarily the price of Bitcoin or any one asset. Right? It's changes in laws and regulation and stance of regulators, which is really opening up the country and making the U.S. open for business. So I think that's something that does require a little bit of explaining, but that's more to people who are maybe from a TradFi space or another just general corporate related to crypto, not digital native space. Because as Emma noted in her question of is BTC over, I mean, it goes back to that other old saying, oh, blockchain, not Bitcoin, or Bitcoin, not blockchain, which we've hopped back and forth. And really, the changes now are changes in laws and regulatory stance and things like that. And that's going to have lasting change, regardless of the whims of the market.
Josh, really good point. David, weigh in on this, and I want to add something to the things that Josh is referencing. We've seen the news, Josh. You and I have texted about it. It's IRS DeFi broker rule is moving through Congress being repealed. OCC now, David saying banks can hold crypto, and there's always almost this implicit perception of, oh, these great things are going to make the industry just explode and people are going to be diving in. It feels like a lot of TradFi, David, is still waiting. What are they waiting for?
Well, first of all, regulated entities can't be operating in the gray. So even if private industries are willing to take on some risk, regulated entities need legislation. It's really funny. Josh was really like, we were channeling each other, because what I was going to say, and really picking up on what Josh was saying, is that we don't have consumer adoption because we don't have regulations that allow for consumer adoption. So, in some ways, it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. And so I'm trying to look at it a broader frame and look from a policy standpoint. We're in like the best position we've been in 5 or 6 years. We've come out of an administration that was hostile to crypto. We have an administration now that is embracing crypto. We're also seeing like a new divide within Democrats, where the younger Democrats are willing to, on a bipartisan manner, go along with crypto legislation. And then, unfortunately, some of the older members are still voting against it, like Senator Warren. But, we had a big movement here getting the Genius Bill out of the Senate Banking Committee. So
Yeah.
I really think there's like 3 pillars. It's for the institutional side, we need regulation to enable them to be in the sandbox, so to speak. We need these ETFs to be available to all retail users, and have the wire center banks enable that. And then the third thing is we need consumer applications that people will use with crypto.
You're going back. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh no, I was just gonna jump in and say, seeing Emma's comment saying no, is the BTC over was definitively one of Ron's family, not me. I wasn't suggesting, Emma, that you were saying it was over. I was just saying you happened in a comment to flag the comment, yes, that Ron had said, yes. So.
And to clarify for Emma, it was actually my barber, which is very weird to hear when there are scissors near your head and someone asks you, is BTC over? And again, nothing I'm discussing ever with anyone is investment advice. Josh, David, really important points. David, you raised the Genius Act. That's moving its way through Congress as a draft pending legislation. We're also analyzing the Stable Act. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about things like the Genius Act and Stable Act? And Josh, certainly weigh in. None of the three of us are lobbyists particularly, but I find it fascinating how open they are to some of the industry feedback that so many of us are providing. Why is Genius Act important, David? Why is Stable Act important?
Well, look, I think, excuse me, a lot of the payment rails, will be more enabled using stable coins. And think of some of the consumer apps that we have right now. And if you could use stable coins for payments and it could be accepted broadly, it would just create more adoption. I think what you're seeing here is 2 bills, the one that was passed in the Senate and then the one that was passed in the House. So Genius in the Senate, Stable in the House. They're providing a framework where both domestic and internationally based stablecoins can operate. And I think the Senate one has a $10 billion threshold to be federally, have federal oversight, and below that for state oversight. So I need to dig into all the details more, but at a high level, I think it's really adoption and allowing, institutions and retail to use institutional applications or fintech apps to pay with stablecoins.
Josh, let's get you into this part of the conversation. And I don't want to forget, the three of us have seen this when we talk about it in our legal working group. Many of the states are moving forward on their versions of things like stablecoin bills. Wyoming, Texas, California, shout out to Joe Sicolo, for example. Josh, how do you see that playing out? What are your perspectives on this kind of plethora of bills that are suddenly in front of everyone?
So, I have a lot of thoughts, not just about that. So I definitely want to get into some of my thoughts about
please.
And things. But I would say, with respect to folks entering the U.S. who have stayed outside, I think there's a great interest in looking where people already have had traction. So there's been a big uptick in interest, for example, in South Dakota.
Right.
As unusual as the UCC laws there may be, right? That's a conversation for another day.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think as people come into the US, they're really looking to see where has the crypto industry found success. And I think I definitely want to touch on some things with the OCC and related matters
please.
with it. But before I do, I just want to say, like, although we focus a lot, all of us probably industry wide, on what's happening at the federal level in terms of changes in the SEC's position and other regulators, you know, the states can come in and fill the regulatory void if they want to, right? They can always be more, well, they can be more protective of their citizens than federal. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to watch. Certainly, we've seen, for example, the SEC have a staff statement on meme coins that we talked about previously. At the same time, we've seen New York come out with guidance and caution about meme coins. So I think as we progress, it will be very interesting to see how the states come up. And one of the reasons, and this is where the OCC comes into my mind for a moment. So I think part of what, as we think about folks who are contemplating doing one of many different sorts of things, whether it's launching a stablecoin, whether it's doing all kinds of other things, and say they're financial institutions or they, are somehow related to a bank, right? There's of course the OCC guidance, super helpful. And as you noted, that clarification confirmed that crypto asset custody, certain stablecoin activities like keeping the reserve, right, participating in independent node verification networks, that these things are generally okay, right? And it also, the guidance rescinded the requirement that you get a supervisory non-objection letter if you're an institution, and demonstrating that you have adequate controls before you can engage in digital asset related activities. So that's all helpful.
Yep.
But I think it's also important that we remember, and there is a big push to try and get these things repealed as well. But this all goes sort of together. You may have seen that a number of financial services trade associations, so like American Bankers Association, right, that they have been pushing to have the repeal or withdrawal of other guidance, right, or have it be substantially revised. So a big one for that is the Federal Reserve's SR 226, which is a letter about engagement in crypto asset related activities by Federal Reserve supervised banks. Right, the Federal Reserve, of course, deals with bank holding companies and various others. But there's a whole bunch of things by the Federal Reserve, the OCC, which the OCC is running ahead of this, right? The FDIC, and then joint statements that that banks are looking to, or bank trade associations are looking to have removed, because those things, if you don't have to get an OCC supervisory non-objection letter, that's fantastic, right?
Yep.
At the same time, if you have your supervision by the Federal Reserve Board, you still will have to go through that process. And I bring that in just to cover the states for a second, because to the extent that New York is involved in one of many different capacities, right, possible, you still potentially have to negotiate or interact with New York DFS if something might be a virtual currency business activity, which of course is very broad. So I think as these pieces and parts get peeled back or modified, I think that's when we're going to see more and more. We've already seen huge moves, though, like as we've talked about in the past, SAB 121 gone, right? OCC bringing back these letters from 2020 and 2021.
Yep.
These are important moves, and the moves will keep coming, and that's when we're really going to see the people diving in.
Josh, really comprehensive. Really appreciate that. And for everyone in the audience, absolutely. There's so much there to untangle. And for everyone in the audience, again, thank you so much for joining us. You mentioned UCC. I was waiting for the time, Josh, that you'd mention it. For the people in the audience, Josh has forgotten more about UCC than certainly I'm ever going to know. David, weigh in on this. And Josh, you brought up New York State. I didn't see the entirety of the transcript or the interview, but the head of the New York Department of Financial Services, Adrian Harris, David, you might have seen this, was interviewed at an event. And I'm paraphrasing here, but made some commentary along the lines of DFS has been involved in, I'm going to use the word suitable, probably the wrong word, suitable regulation of crypto assets for New York State for a decade. And it almost seemed to be positioning New York State as the place to go for regulated crypto asset activity. Are there still challenges around things like New York State DFS, David?
Look, yes, there are. I think DFS is always, when it comes to classification of tokens, they've always taken a more conservative view of token classification than I think the industry has, and I think that this administration has. So I do think there is some friction. I saw one exchange has restricted some listing of tokens in New York State, and the New York State whitelist for tokens is very, very small. So I do think there's some frictions. Look, I would say on the cyber issue, I think New York State's done a really good job. I think in other places, if you ask various clients and certain, third parties who deal with DFS, they have varying views on the effectiveness of some of the regulations. But I think that there will be some friction. But I think they're more conservative when it comes to tokens than I think this administration will be. But I think ultimately, if we get some legislation on a federal level, they're going to have to toe the line on the tokens and the classification, because that will be a federal issue, not a state issue.
Yep. David, Josh, just real quickly on Emma's top line prediction. Emma, we love you, but I am not wagering anything with you because I still owe David a steak dinner. The Fed is going to come to regret ever tangling with Custodia / Caitlin Long. We know Caitlin Long. Many in the industry know Caitlin Long. We've had the privilege of having her. She is a fierce warrior, and I personally agree with you. Josh, go ahead.
I'm just saying, I don't see that up there in the comments. The last one I see by Emma is Sab 121, but that wasn't what I was going to say. So maybe I have a delay over here. And in fact, I'm struggling now to remember what it is that I was. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, now I'm just seeing another Sab 121 thing. So I guess I must be behind. I was just going to say, for New York DFS, though,
yeah,
I think it's interesting that it's being characterized as 10 years of appropriate regulation, right? Because when the BIT license came out, it was not exactly, applauded by many.
No, not at all.
I will say, though, that with respect to the stablecoin legislation, clearly at the federal level, folks have been trying to borrow from a lot of that for quite some time in terms of proposed legislation. And I do think that for stablecoin issuers or potential stablecoin issuers, being able to say that you're regulated in New York, I think that's pretty powerful, both within the rest of the country and throughout the world. Because, if you look at the headlines, New York DFS has been partnering with a lot of folks, including, I think, in the UK and others.
That's right.
Been very active.
I've been taken out to the woodshed by Emma because I've traumatized her for not getting David his steak dinner. Emma, if you realize how difficult it is for David's handlers to schedule some time with me and Josh, you'd understand, but we will make the dinner happen. David, Josh, there's so much going on. I do want to pivot back to one thing. David regularly gets text messages from me somewhere around 8-ish or so before some data comes out. Data, we did see some inflation data that came out that noted inflation seemed to be moderating. It's always kind of this mixed bag of data. But the one signal I wanted to get your perspective on, David, that really struck me, bless you, David, was the price of an ounce of gold hitting $3,000 for the first time. David, I want to ask you a question that's going to sound a lot more provocative than I mean it to be. Is gold store of value use case dead in the face of $3,000 an ounce gold?
Well, no, Ron, I would say the opposite. I think with $3,000 an ounce, people are definitely looking at it as a store of value. I think it's very interesting, though, because I think people are making distinctions between Bitcoin and gold, digital gold versus traditional gold. But we still have to remember that a lot of the market still can't access these ETFs, and a large part of them are not going to crypto exchanges. I mean, obviously, there's a big cohort that uses crypto exchanges, but I really think until we get an open playing field with the exchanges having access, the wire center banks having access, that will give us a sense of the apples to apples. And one other thing I want to mention is, let's not forget that right now we can have, staking assets in an ETF.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be very interesting if you had an RIA who could say, you know what, if you want, we can give you exposure to like the top 10 or top 15 crypto assets, and we can give you a 2 to 4% return on that through staking. That suddenly makes a very interesting offering to potential customers that we don't have in the market. Yeah. So I think the way I'm looking at it, Ron, is we're still not apples to apples as far as accessibility. So until that happens, it's hard to really measure the two in my eyes.
David, fair point. And again, Emma is not letting it go. Yes, you can join the steak dinner in New York City. As soon as we figure out a date, Emma, we will let you know. Maybe David will send the Bombardier or the Gulfstream to go get you. David, Josh, David, I appreciate that perspective vis-a-vis gold. You know, the other thing, David, I want to pivot to, and Josh, I obviously love your perspectives. I'm ripping up the script here a bit. David, recently we had a working group meeting conversation, and one of the conversations was, and again, not investment advice particularly, Ethereum versus Solana versus some of the platforms and capabilities that TradFi is beginning to look at. And I did a quick analysis of the market cap. I did not realize the Ethereum market cap the Bitcoin market cap is 7 times larger than Ethereum's market cap, which makes me look at this and say that's an obvious, easy payments rail platform level 1 that the world should be looking at. David, when in your perch at your organization, when you look at Ethereum for TradFi or Solana for TradFi, where's that dialogue going? And Josh, that's got to be part of the dialogue with your clients as well.
Look, I think a lot of people still view Ethereum as sort of the infrastructure of the future for crypto and creating crypto rails. But I mean, look, whatever people think about meme coins, the Solana ecosystem was able to handle massive amount of transactions of meme coins, during this rush. So I think in some ways that has been stress tested. Look, I think ultimately Ethereum is very strong. I do think it's going to be embedded in a lot of the ecosystem and continue to be but for some reason right now it's really not in favor as far as the price stands. So, but again, this is sort of the distinction of utility and price. And I'm going to make another example for you on that.
Please.
Look at all these altcoins. We've traded almost down to where we were in October, and some of the prices. I know there's a couple that I won't mention them by name, but I was looking at one of them that was once at $350 and is now trading at $4.
Yeah.
Now, one could say, obviously, the $350, that was probably too much. But this token has a lot more utility than it did a couple of years ago. So I think what people are forgetting with some of the, higher value altcoins is that the technology's grown, their capabilities have grown, but they're still being priced in a certain way. So I think one of the challenges is when you think about Bitcoin, there's a finite supply, but when you think about altcoins, there's sort of an infinite supply because you can keep creating more altcoins. So it's important just to, look at the ones that create value or look at the ones that have really good tech and then really ask yourself, well, why is this discounted from where it was a couple of years ago if the tech has improved so much?
David, it also does come back to use cases. I was just looking at some of the indices on the alts. It is deep, not altcoin season comparable to Bitcoin, for example. I think CoinMarketCap does a good job on an alt index. It's something out of 100 down to 16. David, what are the altcoin use cases? Sorry, and Josh, certainly want your perspectives here as well. What are the altcoin use cases that make sense and survive, David?
Well, I mean, they're ones that we've talked about before and we'll, talk about again. But I definitely think that, a crossover with AI,
right?
I think logistics, I think trade finance. I think those are a few that I've always been bullish on. But I think that, as we loosen regulation here or we formalize regulation so that businesses can move forward, there are a lot more use cases that industry will use. I think the problem is until regulated entities can interact with some of these, blockchains and offer things to their clients and not just use them internally, I think that's really an issue. And the last one I forgot was, real world tokenization.
Right.
Real world asset tokens. I think the ones that have a really good ecosystem and good technology will do well. I mean, because remember, we can, you can create, tokenized bonds. You can create these things, but mostly institutions are the only ones who can really access these the majority of the time. So we need to have products not only that can be tokenized, but also can be available in some form to retail.
David, really good point. And just a real quick shout out to David Pope, who's a WSBA member. It really talks to a lot of the work. We talk about states. Wyoming is doing a lot of work in tokenization. David's a WSBA member and member of the Wyoming Stablecoin Commission, probably screwing that up. So if you're out there, look up David Pope. It's worth the conversation. Josh, I wanted to pivot one last time to litigation. And the reason I want to bring this up is we have this in our meetings, and I'm not sure it's discussed enough. I'd love to see what your thoughts are on updates. All of the things we're seeing from a regulatory perspective being rolled back by the SEC, by the government, et cetera. Private litigation is a very different beast. What are your perspectives on where private litigation stands today, to the extent you can speak to it? And has that changed given some of the changes we've seen in Washington, do you think?
So it's a great question. I mean, I know that there are certain ecosystems out there and certain parties within those ecosystems who remain subject to ongoing lawsuits
Yep.
by private plaintiffs, including in respect of alleged securities violations. And I do know that, notwithstanding that those same ecosystems or key, I want to be careful how I say this,
Yep.
but parties within those ecosystems, notwithstanding how much success they may be having in the market right now, and or applauding the efforts of the administration at a federal level, I would say that from a perspective of just from a legal perspective, they are remaining in some ways cautious about how they do things because of these ongoing litigations. Even though they think the litigation's wrong, even though they don't think that anything was done improperly or incorrectly, um, I I have to imagine that, just as we've seen private litigation in a number of areas,
Right.
but unrelated to crypto, uh, given the different political winds, I'm trying to be as apolitic as possible right now.
You're
But
doing a wonderful job.
I mean, I do think it's always a wild card who's going to bring a case and where, right? I think, to the extent that there's fraud, and honestly, to the extent that there's harm, in many cases, private litigation plays a very important role. Now, to the extent that private litigation might be trying to shoehorn something back into a securities law,
Yeah.
shoe,
Mhm.
after it has been sprung from that, I
Yeah.
think that's problematic. But I think, as an industry, to the extent that we can continue to educate the judiciary and others, I think that
Yeah.
that's what we should be doing.
Josh, really good point, and thank you for kind of elaborating on that. And obviously, this feeds a lot into the conversations the three of us regularly have. For everyone in the audience, Wall Street Blockchain Alliance will be visiting Washington, D.C. We'll be there March 27th, meeting stakeholders at the Hill and at various regulators. It'll be great to get together, David, Josh, with so many of our colleagues, both that are coming down for the trip as well as colleagues that are already in D.C. David, I want to bring it home with something that is totally not in the agenda, and I don't want to make it a politics thing particularly. But I did see a headline yesterday that made me pause for a moment and be slightly concerned. The president's family allegedly looking to invest in Binance, or at least broaching that topic. My instinct tells me that's probably not a good thing to be reading in the news. No reflection on either the family or Binance. David, am I overly apprehensive when I see headlines like that?
Well, I think it cuts two ways. I think optically it could be problematic to see potential ties. The other way is, one thing also is that, CZ has come out and said that that's not true. And, CZ and Bloomberg have a little bit of history with each other, where CZ's felt that Bloomberg hasn't properly covered Binance, and Bloomberg's had to retract some statements they've made about Binance. So I think, let's see what happens. I think there are a lot of rumors that come out in our space, whether it be, with specific exchanges or different tokens. And so, there's, obviously we're still waiting for a final, resolution in Ripple, but there's, rumors every day coming out about what a settlement will look like, and, things like that. So I think I'm just going to take the longer view that let's just see if something, does happen and what it looks like before we sort of take a view. And look, I think, obviously it's one thing if the president is doing something, it's another thing if his family is doing something, and who is it, and, who has ownership and who has, responsibilities. So I really like to wait for details, because there's just so many rumors right now out. If we took each one as verbatim, it would just, I think your head would explode.
Fair point, David. We shouldn't be listening to the rumor mill. And for everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you want to get real information, not worry about rumor mill misinformation, just watch David or Josh or so many of our members at the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. Josh, what have you got coming up next week? Are you traveling again? Can't hear you.
You're on mute now, Josh.
No, not to my knowledge, unless there's something on my calendar that I haven't been thinking of. No, I think after doing a lot of travel, I came back and was jet lagged, and frankly, wasn't feeling so great. So I'm taking a little break on the travel. One of my children does have strep throat as of last night, so that's always fun. But I mean, I think I'll just be working.
For everyone in the audience, when you're in Josh Klayman's world, I'd say 3 out of every 7 emails you receive from her are her out of offices because she's on international travel. And we're always concerned about where you are, Josh, but it's always good to see you. And obviously I'm joking. David, when the embargoes and the tariffs hit, does that impact the caviar waiting on the Gulf Stream for you? How are you dealing with, the perils of traveling private?
I don't know, Ron. I was thinking about you and that you may want to get this dinner done before the, liquor tariffs, because it's going to cost you 200% more for that Barolo we'll be drinking at dinner.
At 200% more, you get a Hungry Man Salisbury steak, and I'll owe you when the tariffs are done, David.
No, look, I'll be in Florida enjoying the good weather, and just it's a lot more pleasurable to do all the reading we have to do when you can sit outside in the sun. But
I hate you. I mean, not really. Just a little.
But I do get her point, David. Yes.
Well, look, yeah. All I can say is I enjoy being a Floridian, and it's it's one of the benefits when you are working a lot, that you can at least have that as the benefit, on a long day.
He's just piling on to the flame, Josh.
What about you, Ron? What are you doing?
I am spending an unbelievable amount of time trying to make sure we button up all of the work associated with our trip to DC, which is always fun. And agendas are always interesting to put together. Like both of you, it's just keeping up on all of the news and really working with so many of our members across all of the different working groups that you know about, really working on the different work streams that we've got. We've got our tokenization vendor compendium coming out shortly. So just keeping busy, trying to relax a little bit. I won't be sunning at a beach, obviously, but I've got a lovely Sauvignon Blanc waiting for me over the weekend, and I'll probably be rereading The Stable Act, which my wife thinks is very, very weird. But it's been busy. Josh, David, let's leave it there. For everyone in the audience, if we missed any of your questions, please drop us a note, info@wsba.co. We will be back next week. Josh, we might have to do live from DC. We're trying to figure out what the roundup looks like for that week. We'll let everyone know well in advance, but let's leave it there. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Have a great weekend. We will chat with you all soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.